The Galactic Assembly always considered humanity an insignificant race, a primitive, warlike species barely scraping by on the fringes of the known universe. Compared to the towering empires of the Zelthar Dominion, the cold efficiency of the Vraics Consensus, and the ancient wisdom of the Kolven, humans were little more than insects, unpredictable, chaotic, and ultimately harmless. Or so they thought. For centuries, the Assembly had monitored humanity's progress, ensuring they remained contained within their own little star system. The few encounters between humans and the greater galactic powers had only reinforced the belief that these creatures were technologically inferior and strategically inept. So when the Dralkoth Empire launched a brutal assault on the Sol system, no one in the Assembly intervened. The Dralkoth were an expansionist race, thriving on war and conquest. Their fleets were unmatched, their warriors merciless. Earth, in the eyes of the Assembly, was doomed. Except something strange happened. The Dralkoth invasion fleet, boasting over 1,000 warships, entered the Sol system with ease. Their forces overwhelmed the outer colonies and shattered the orbital defenses around Mars in a single day. Humanity barely fought back. Their outdated ships engaged in skirmishes, but the resistance was laughable. Then Earth fell silent. No transmissions, no distress signals, no desperate pleas for help. Just silence. And then the Supernova Fleet emerged. The universe had grossly underestimated humanity. The Dralkoth fleet vanished without a trace, every last ship obliterated. The Galactic Assembly scrambled to understand what had happened, sending reconnaissance drones and spies to investigate. What they found defied all logic. A fleet of warships, unlike anything seen before, now patrolled the Sol system. Their design was eerily unfamiliar. Sleek, black vessels that seemed to swallow light itself. They moved with impossible precision, their weapon systems beyond anything the Assembly had ever conceived. And then came the message. Humanity had never been weak. They had never been primitive. They had only been waiting. The Supernova Fleet was humanity's true strength, hidden for centuries in the depths of space. It had been built in secret, beyond the reach of prying eyes, prepared for the moment when the universe would come knocking. And now that moment had arrived. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted overnight. Humanity was no longer an afterthought. They were the storm on the horizon, the reckoning no one had seen coming. The Galactic Assembly had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated the one species that had spent its entire history preparing for war. And now, the universe would learn what it meant to face humanity's wrath. The Galactic Assembly's High Council chamber was silent as the holographic projections played before them. The wreckage of the Dralkoth fleet drifted lifelessly in the void of space. No distress beacons, no escape pods, no survivors. The assembled diplomats, military strategists, and intelligence officers stared in horror. The Dralkoth were not weak. They were conquerors, warriors who had subjugated dozens of species, crushed entire civilizations under their boots. Yet humanity had wiped them out in a single decisive counterattack. "This is impossible," murmured High Speaker Valkesh of the Kolven, his pale silver eyes locked onto the floating debris. The Dralkoth fleet should have overwhelmed them. There was no record of Earth possessing such advanced technology. "No record because they hid it," growled Admiral Zorath of the Zelthar Dominion. "They played the role of prey while sharpening their claws in the shadows." He clenched his three-fingered fists. "And now, they have shown their fangs." The meeting room buzzed with tense murmurs. Humanity had not just defended itself. It had delivered a message. The Supernova Fleet had been hidden for centuries, an unseen force lurking in the void. How had they managed to construct such powerful warships without detection? Where had they gathered the resources? More importantly, why had they waited until now to reveal themselves? A new transmission flickered to life in the center of the chamber. The face of a human appeared, sharp-eyed, cold, utterly calm. He wore no military uniform, no grand regalia, just a simple black suit. "This is Fleet Commander Elias Voss of the Supernova Fleet," he said. His voice was steady, almost casual, but the weight behind his words sent a chill through the chamber. "I believe you have questions." The silence was suffocating. The High Speaker leaned forward. What have you done?" Voss tilted his head slightly. "What we had to." "You exterminated the Dralkoth without mercy," barked Admiral Zorath. "That was not war, it was annihilation." Voss's expression didn't change. "They came to burn our world. We returned the favor." A murmur of unease rippled through the assembly. "You were never supposed to have this kind of power," the High Speaker said, his voice barely above a whisper. The assembly agreed that Earth was to remain contained. "Ah," Voss said, his lips curving slightly. "You assumed containment was your decision to make." The High Speaker stiffened. "We watched," Voss continued. "We listened. For centuries we played the part you expected. Primitive, fractured, unworthy of notice. You saw our wars, our struggles, our chaos, and you assumed we were incapable of unity, of progress. That was your mistake." A new set of holographic displays appeared behind him. Detailed schematics of supernova-class warships, energy weapons far beyond anything the Assembly had encountered, stealth technology that rendered fleets invisible to sensors. "You thought we were a species of war," Voss said. "And you were right, but unlike the Dralkoth, we do not wage war for conquest." His gaze hardened. "We wage war for survival." The room was deathly silent. "You never saw us coming," Voss said, "and that was by design." The screen went dark. For the first time in millennia, the Galactic Assembly felt something it had long forgotten. Fear. The silence in the Galactic Assembly chamber was thick with tension. No one spoke. No one moved. It was as if the entire weight of the universe had pressed down on them all at once. For centuries, they had viewed humanity as a minor race, reckless, disorganized, insignificant. Now the very thought of them sent a shudder through the highest ranks of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. Admiral Zorath was the first to break the silence. "We cannot let this stand." His voice was sharp, laced with barely contained fury. "The humans have kept their power hidden for centuries. That means they have been deceiving us from the beginning. This Supernova Fleet, it is a direct threat to the stability of the Assembly." "Stability?" scoffed Counselor Irana of the Vrix Consensus. Her glowing eyes flickered with cold amusement. "I believe what you mean to say is that they are a threat to the dominance of the old powers." She leaned forward. "You fear them?" Zorath bared his sharp teeth. "We should all fear them. They did not just repel an invasion. They erased an empire in a matter of hours." He turned his gaze to the High Speaker. "If we do nothing, we will be next." The High Speaker, still staring at the now dark screen where Commander Elias Voss had spoken, exhaled slowly. "Perhaps," he said at last, "humanity does not seek war beyond its borders. Their actions were defensive. We all saw the transmissions. Sul was attacked first. They only responded." Zorath slammed a fist against the table. "Then why did they hide their true power? Why keep the Supernova Fleet secret unless they were waiting for the perfect moment to strike?" His reptilian eyes narrowed. "They were playing the long game. They let us believe they were weak. Now they have revealed themselves, and they expect us to do nothing?" Counselor Irana folded her hands. "Perhaps the better question is, what happens if we challenge them?" The chamber fell into uneasy silence again. The answer was obvious. No one knew the full capabilities of the Supernova Fleet. Humanity had kept it hidden for a reason. If they had spent centuries preparing for this moment, how much more were they hiding? If they had annihilated the Dralkoth without breaking a sweat, what chance did the rest of the assembly have? The High Speaker finally straightened his posture. "We will not act in haste," he declared. "We must learn more. If the humans do not seek conquest, we must understand their true intentions before making enemies of them." Zorath hissed, but did not argue. He knew the unspoken truth. If the Galactic Assembly miscalculated, they would not survive the war that followed. Deep within the Sol system, aboard the command bridge of the Dreadnought Oblivion's wake, Elias Voss studied the latest intelligence reports. Across from him, Rear Admiral Claire Holden stood at attention. "They're scared," she said with a small smirk. "The Assembly doesn't know what to do with us." Voss nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "They expected a cornered animal," he murmured. "Instead, they found a sleeping predator." He turned to the main viewport, watching the Supernova Fleet as it moved in perfect formation. Their ships were silent specters, weapons primed, shields humming with barely contained energy. "They will not attack. Not yet," Voss continued, "but they will try to probe us, find weaknesses, look for leverage." He exhaled. "And when they do, we will remind them why humanity has survived against impossible odds for so long." Holden crossed her arms. "What are our next orders?" Voss let the silence hang between them before speaking. "We wait." Holden blinked. "Wait? For what?" Voss's gaze was cold as steel. "For them to make the first mistake." The Galactic Assembly wasted no time. Within hours of their meeting, reconnaissance fleets were dispatched toward Sol. Officially, they were diplomatic envoys, sent to open communication channels and establish peaceful relations. Unofficially, they were spies. The first fleet belonged to the Zelthar Dominion, 6 battlecruisers, each equipped with state-of-the-art stealth scanners and long-range observation technology. Their mission was simple: gather intelligence on the Supernova Fleet, identify weaknesses, and report back before humanity could detect them. They never returned. The last transmission received from the Zelthar fleet was a garbled, static-filled warning. "They see us! Then silence. The Assembly reeled. How? The Zelthar were masters of stealth, their ships cloaked beyond detection. Yet humanity had seen them coming. Worse, they had eliminated them without hesitation. Panic set in. If the humans could detect stealth ships, if they could erase an entire fleet before it could escape, what else were they capable of? Still, the Assembly refused to accept the truth. The Vriek's consensus tried next, sending a probe disguised as a drifting asteroid. It was small, nearly invisible to most standard detection systems. It never made it past Neptune. The probe's data logs, recovered through a backup relay, showed something terrifying. Humanity wasn't just waiting, they were watching. Even the smallest, most insignificant movements within the Sol system were tracked in real time. It was as if the humans had turned their entire system into a hunting ground. Then, for the first time in history, the Supernova Fleet moved. A single warship, a sleek, midnight black vessel larger than any known dreadnought, left the Sol system. It passed by Pluto in absolute silence, slipping into deep space without a word. The Assembly watched in stunned horror. "Where is it going?" the High Speaker asked. No one had an answer. The Zelthar suspected it was heading toward their homeworld. The Vrieks believed it was a warning shot, a demonstration of power. The Kalven feared something worse, an envoy not for war, but for an ultimatum. And then, 3 standard cycles later, a message arrived. Not from the humans, from the Dralkoth, the same species that had supposedly been wiped out. Their message was short, terrifying in its simplicity. We were wrong. They are not conquerors. They are not invaders. They are something else. You do not understand what you have provoked. We surrender. The Galactic Assembly was thrown into chaos. The Dralkoth were warriors, undefeated in countless battles. They did not surrender. Yet here they were, broadcasting their capitulation across every known frequency. What had humanity done to them? The answer came sooner than expected. One by one, ships began appearing on the edges of assembly space, not in attack formations, not in fleets, just watching, observing, studying. And then, in the heart of the Assembly's capital system, a single human warship appeared, one of the Supernova Fleet's Dreadnoughts. It moved slowly, deliberately, taking position above the largest trade hub in the galaxy. It did not fire. It did not speak. It simply waited, waiting for the Assembly to decide its next move, waiting for them to understand what had already become inevitable. Humanity was here, and the age of the old empires was over. The massive Dreadnought hung above the Galactic Assembly's trade hub like a specter of judgment. It was unlike any warship the Assembly had ever encountered. Black as the void, with no visible weapon systems, no thruster trails, no energy signatures that could be detected. It was as if the ship itself had been carved from the darkness of space. Panic spread across the capital system. Civilian ships scattered, governments issued emergency orders, and planetary defenses were placed on high alert. Yet the human warship made no aggressive move. It simply existed, an undeniable force pressing down on the Assembly with nothing more than its presence. The High Speaker called an emergency meeting. Every major power in the Assembly was present, some through holograms, some physically seated in the Grand Chamber, but all united in a single, unspoken fear. No one wanted to be the first to speak. Admiral Zorath, his patience long exhausted, finally broke the silence. "This is an act of war," he snarled, his claws digging into the metallic surface of the table. "They send a warship into our heart and expect us to sit idly by? We must retaliate." "Retaliate?" Counselor Irana scoffed. "With what, exactly?" "Do you not remember what happened to the Dralkoth?" Zorath bared his fangs. "The Dralkoth were arrogant fools who thought brute strength would win the day. We are not so reckless." The High Speaker steepled his fingers, his face unreadable. "And yet, our intelligence reports confirm that every attempt to infiltrate Sul has resulted in complete failure. If they can track our stealth ships, if they can eliminate entire fleets before we even register their presence, tell me, Admiral, how do you propose we fight an enemy we cannot even see?" Zorath fell silent, his frustration evident. Then another transmission arrived. Unlike before, this one was not a broad, ominous message. It was direct, sent exclusively to the High Speaker's personal channel. A single sentence. "It is time to talk." The High Speaker hesitated only a moment before nodding to his aides. "Open a secure line." The chamber held its collective breath as a new hologram flickered to life. Once again, Fleet Commander Elias Voss stood before them, his expression as unreadable as before. "You waited," the High Speaker said, his voice carefully neutral. "You did not fire, did not destroy, did not demand. Why?" Voss clasped his hands behind his back. "Because destruction was never our goal." "Then what is?" For the first time, a hint of amusement flickered across the commander's face. "Understanding." The room stiffened. Zorath snarled. "You expect us to believe that after you wiped out the Dralkoth?" Voss tilted his head slightly. Did we? Silence. The assembly had seen the wreckage. They had assumed, but they had never truly confirmed. The Dralkoth's message rang in their ears. We surrender. What did you do to them? The High Speaker asked. Voss's voice was calm. We showed them the truth. What truth? The truth about us, about what we've seen, about the war that is coming. The chamber went cold. War? The High Speaker repeated. With whom? Voss leaned in slightly, his gaze intense. You think we built the Supernova Fleet for you? A wave of unease rippled through the assembly. Voss exhaled slowly. We are not your enemy, he said, but something else is, and it is coming. The hologram flickered out, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. For the first time, the Galactic Assembly understood a terrifying reality. Humanity had not spent centuries hiding their strength to deceive them. They had been preparing, not for war against the Assembly, but for something far worse. The chamber remained deathly silent long after Elias Voss's transmission ended. The weight of his words pressed down on the assembled leaders like a gravitational collapse. Something worse was coming. For centuries, the Galactic Assembly had viewed itself as the center of the known universe. Empires rose and fell within its influence. No external force had ever threatened its stability. Until now. The High Speaker was the first to break the silence. We need answers, he said firmly. We can no longer treat humanity as an anomaly. They are the only ones who seem to understand what is happening. He turned toward the intelligence officials standing in the chamber. What do we know? One of the analysts, a Vrix strategist named Sarveen, hesitated before speaking. Very little, High Speaker, he admitted. The humans have concealed their activities too well. We have no records of what they have been preparing for. If they speak the truth, and a larger threat is on the horizon, we have seen no signs of it. Zorath scoffed. Or perhaps they are lying. Perhaps this threat is just an excuse to justify their expansion, a means of keeping us fearful while they consolidate their power. The chamber murmured in uneasy agreement. The High Speaker, however, was not convinced. Voss had not spoken like a conqueror. His words had not been threats, but warnings. Send a delegation, he said at last. We need to speak with the humans face to face. If they have information about an unknown enemy, we cannot afford ignorance. The motion was met with tension, but ultimately no one could argue against it. 3 standard cycles later, a single diplomatic vessel, escorted by 2 assembly warships, entered the Sol system under strict ceasefire protocols. It was humanity who dictated the terms of the meeting. The delegation would not meet on Earth, nor on any station belonging to the Assembly. Instead, they were directed to a massive structure orbiting just beyond Neptune, one that no Assembly intelligence report had ever documented. It was a space station of unimaginable scale, sleek and black like the Supernova Fleet, its surface lined with hidden weapons and defensive systems, far beyond anything in the Assembly's arsenal. The ship's pilot, a seasoned diplomat from the Kalven, let out an unsteady breath. This station isn't just a military outpost, he murmured. It's a fortress. As they docked, human soldiers escorted the delegation inside. Unlike the ragged, desperate warriors the Assembly had once imagined, these men and women were disciplined, well-equipped, and utterly unreadable. They were led to a central command hall where Elias Voss stood waiting. Welcome, he said simply. I imagine you have questions. The High Speaker, who had insisted on coming in person, wasted no time. You said something is coming. What did you mean? Voss gestured toward a massive screen behind him. It flickered to life, displaying what at first appeared to be empty space. Then the image shifted, deep beyond the galactic borders, past the furthest colonies of known civilization. A shape emerged from the void. No, not a shape, a presence, dark, enormous, moving with an unnatural stillness, like the absence of motion itself. It was impossible to gauge its size, its boundaries shifting like it existed outside of normal space, but its trajectory was unmistakable. It was coming straight for them. "The Assembly thinks it has ruled for millennia," Voss said, "but it has ruled over an illusion of peace. We have been blind to what lies beyond." His expression darkened. "Humanity learned the truth decades ago, and we have been preparing ever since." The High Speaker stared at the screen, unable to tear his eyes away. "What is it?" Voss turned to face him, his expression grim. "We call them the Abyssal." A deep silence followed. "You said you learned the truth," the High Speaker said slowly. "How?" Voss exhaled. "Because we encountered them first." The room went cold. Humanity had not simply been preparing for war, they had already fought it, and now the rest of the galaxy was about to follow. The High Speaker stared at the shifting mass on the screen, his mind struggling to grasp what he was seeing. It wasn't just a fleet or a singular threat. It was something wrong, something that should not exist. "When?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "When did you first encounter them?" Elias Voss's expression was unreadable. 72 years ago, he said. A stunned silence filled the chamber. 72 years. That meant humanity had been at war long before the Dralkoth invasion, long before the Assembly had even acknowledged them as a potential power. "You mean to tell us," Admiral Zorath finally growled, "that your people have been fighting an enemy of this magnitude for nearly a century, and you said nothing?" Voss's cold stare met Zorath's furious gaze. "Would you have believed us?" No one answered. Voss continued. "When we made first contact with the greater galaxy, we realized something horrifying. You knew nothing. The Abyssal existed beyond the edges of your maps, in regions you dismissed as dead space. But we saw the signs. We followed the disappearances, the broken colonies, the lost ships, and when we reached beyond the frontier," his jaw tightened. "We found them waiting." The screen flickered again, displaying footage from old, grainy ship logs. A human fleet, primitive compared to the Supernova Fleet, engaged in a battle against something that did not move like a ship, did not fire like any known weapon. The enemy's form shifted and twisted, its edges fading in and out of existence. A single human warship fired its main cannon. The projectile passed through the enemy as if it wasn't even there. A moment later, the warship's hull began to rot. Not from fire, not from impact, but from something unseen consuming it from the inside. Then the feed cut to static. "They don't wage war as you understand it," Voss said. "They don't take territory. They don't negotiate. They don't leave survivors. The ships, the soldiers, the planets they touch." He glanced at the High Speaker. "They don't die. They disappear." The chamber was utterly silent. The High Speaker forced himself to speak. "And how have you survived?" Voss turned back to the screen. Another image appeared. A planetary surface, barren and lifeless. The structures were intact, but the atmosphere was wrong. A dense, sickening void hung over the landscape, distorting reality itself. The remains of an old human colony sat in eerie silence, untouched, yet utterly abandoned. "We lost 5 colonies before we understood," Voss said. "Conventional weapons are useless. Energy shielding means nothing. The Abyssal don't invade. They consume. And if they reach the core systems of the galaxy..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Zorath's rage had faded, replaced by something much worse. Fear. "Why did you never warn us?" the High Speaker asked. Voss exhaled. "We tried," he admitted. "We sent signals beyond Sol. We sent unmanned probes to assembly space with warnings. None of them returned. None of them were acknowledged. His voice darkened. Either your empires dismissed them, or someone chose to ignore them. The weight of that accusation hung in the air. Had someone within the assembly known? Had they silenced the warnings out of arrogance, out of fear of disrupting their own power? Irana, the Vrik's counselor, spoke next. If your Supernova Fleet is prepared, why haven't you destroyed them? Voss's expression remained cold. Because we can't. A sickening realization washed over the chamber. At best, Voss continued, we have delayed them. Our fleet is the strongest in the known galaxy, but we are fighting something that does not fight back. It does not tire. It does not break. We can destroy their forms, but they reform. We can repel their advances, but they return stronger. We are not winning. He gestured toward the massive screen. The abyssal shape continued its slow, inevitable movement toward assembly space. And now, he said, they are coming for you. The room remained frozen in terror. For the first time in its long and storied history, the Galactic Assembly faced an enemy that did not care for diplomacy, for power struggles, for territorial disputes. The Abyssal were coming, and humanity was the only reason they had not arrived sooner. The High Speaker took a slow breath. What do you need? Elias Voss turned toward him, his eyes as sharp as a blade. Everything. The High Speaker exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the table. You're asking us to put our entire fleet under human command? Elias Voss folded his arms. I'm asking you to survive. The chamber erupted into chaos. Admiral Zorath slammed his fist against the table. We are the strongest empires in the known galaxy, and you want us to kneel before a species that spent centuries deceiving us? You're not listening, Voss said coldly. Your fleets, your weapons, your tactics, none of them will work. If you fight the Abyssal the way you've fought every other war, you will lose. Counselor Irana spoke, her voice softer but no less tense. Then explain. If we give you full military authority, how do we fight them? Voss turned toward the massive screen. A new image appeared, one that sent a chill through the chamber. A line of assembly ships, thousands strong, holding formation against an abyssal incursion. They fired in perfect unison, their combined firepower capable of glassing a planet. It did nothing. The abyssal form shimmered, twisting in ways that defied physics. Then, like a tidal wave, it crashed forward. The footage cut out. That was an experiment, Voss said. We needed to see if your forces could stand against them alone. He turned to face them. They lasted 7 minutes. The High Speaker felt his stomach turn. Voss gestured again, and a different image appeared. This one of the Supernova Fleet. Unlike the Assembly's formation, humanity's ships did not fight in rigid battle lines. They moved like predators, weaving through enemy territory with impossible precision. Where conventional weapons failed, humanity had adapted. The footage showed specialized warheads detonating around the Abyssal, forcing it to retreat. It showed ships deploying strange energy fields that slowed the enemy's advance. It showed coordinated precision, not brute force. This is why you need us, Voss said. We've spent 70 years learning how to stall them. You have spent 0. Zorath's jaw clenched, but for once, he didn't argue. The High Speaker straightened his posture. Then we have no choice. He turned toward the assembly leaders, his expression grim. We are no longer rulers of this galaxy. We are no longer politicians debating policy. We are soldiers in a war we never saw coming. Silence. Then, one by one, the representatives gave their solemn agreement. Voss gave a sharp nod. Then let's begin. The transformation of the galaxy was immediate. For the first time in history, the great empires cast aside their rivalries. The Zelthar Dominion, the Vrik's Consensus, the Kalven Republic, All of them abandoned centuries-old grudges and placed their fleets under a single command: humanity's command. The Assembly's warships were redesigned under human guidance, their outdated tactics replaced with precision warfare. Supernova engineers installed specialized weapon systems, retrofitting alien vessels for a fight unlike any before. Training programs were implemented. Harsh programs. Human officers drilled soldiers from every species, forging them into something the Assembly had never seen before: an actual military force, not a collection of isolated powers. Resistance was crushed swiftly. When an Assembly admiral refused to acknowledge human authority, his fleet was disarmed and his command stripped. There was no time for arrogance. The war had already begun. And then, the Abyssal arrived. The first incursion came at the edges of Assembly space. It was subtle at first, ships disappearing without distress signals, planets going silent overnight. Then, the true horror unfolded. The Abyssal surged forward in a wave of darkness, their very presence warping the laws of reality. Assembly forces, even with their new weapons, struggled to hold the line. Every battle was a desperate fight for survival, every victory paid for in blood and sacrifice. But humanity held. For the first time, the Abyssal did not advance uncontested. The Supernova Fleet, leading the charge, pushed them back in brutal, unrelenting counterattacks. The war that had nearly been lost before it began was now a true contest. For the first time, the galaxy fought back. In the war room aboard Oblivion's Wake, Elias Voss watched the battle unfold in real time. His expression was unreadable, but Rear Admiral Claire Holden could see the tension in his shoulders. "We're holding the front," she reported. "But barely. The Abyssal are adapting, faster than before." Voss nodded. "They've never faced a united force before. They're learning from us." He exhaled. "Which means we need to be faster." Holden hesitated. "And if we're not?" Voss turned to her, his expression dark. "Then humanity was never the real threat to this galaxy." His gaze shifted back to the battlefield, where the fate of all civilization now hung in the balance. The final war had begun.